folks. So I'm going to just really quickly look at the Macbeth we meet in at the beginning of Act 1. Very, very short video. Just a reminder. This is the English Mind Maps document. If you're in my full-time class, you have this. If you're in my part-time classes, you have sections of this that you get monthly. If you're not in my classes at all, you're just watching this on YouTube and you want copies of these notes, you can email me at pmcbrunner@icloud.com. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're looking at Macbeth and we're looking at his character and what we need to know about his character. We need to remember that the question is not going to be, write an essay about Macbeth. Okay, so we're talking critical thinking. These are the types of things. This is the types of skills that you need to be able to display control of when you do your Leaving Cert. But the basic knowledge of the play needs to be. We need to get a good control over our basic knowledge of the play before we can employ our critical thinking skills. So, as I said to you before, the key here is concentrate on the characters. And that's what I've done a mind map on Macbeth, as I said, Lady Macbeth, Banquo, and all the other characters, okay? And we work our way through those over the course of the year. And then every once in a while, I'll throw up a little video where I say, okay, look, we looked at those quotes last week. Now let's look at a question that's not necessarily on that character, but where there might be a quote that we've looked at that could be useful in answering that question. I might even do that today in today's video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the opening impressions of Macbeth. Okay, so I suppose my favourite quote related to Macbeth in the whole play is this one. And it's spoken by Hecate, who is, if you like, the goddess of witchcraft. She's essentially the three witches, the three weird sisters in the play. She's their superior. And of course, she's a creature of the devil. She's a creature of darkness. And she says of Macbeth, he shall spurn fate, scorn death, and bear his hopes above wisdom, grace, and fear. Now you see that there? Nowhere in the play does anybody sum up Macbeth's character as well as she does there when she says he bears his hopes above wisdom, grace, and fear. Hopes, that's his ambition. She understands the power of his ambition. And his ambition outweighs his wisdom because he knows in many of the things he does in the play that they are self-destructive, but his ambition outweighs that wisdom. Grace refers to God and to God's rules. And in the world of the play, there's a very clear natural order. God is not a theory. God is not an abstract concept. God is very much an actor in the world of this play. And Macbeth understands God's rules and his ambition outweighs them. So when he's damned, he knows he's going to be damned and damned to be sent to hell for his actions. Finally, fear. This is death. He's never, ever feared death from the very beginning. We'll see that in a moment. But fear for what happens after death, that means damnation. That means being sent to hell. His eternal duel, as he describes it in the play himself, being sent to hell. He knows that's the consequences of his actions. He knows that if he offends God, he will be punished. He knows that his actions are not wise, but his ambition outweighs all of those factors. And that's why Hecate says it's going to be easy to manipulate this guy because his ambition is so overwhelming, so vaulting. Okay, now, what do we know about Macbeth? He's a tragic hero. If you did get the easy question, and sometimes there is an easy question, and you were asked to, write an essay in which you explore Macbeth as the quintessential or perfect example of a tragic hero, well, you have to know what a tragic hero is, or the definition of one. Goes back to ancient Greece. Aristotle, one of the Greek playwrights and philosophers, described a tragic hero as a male character, tick a box, Macbeth, of noble birth, tick a box, he's a member of the royal family, who experiences a reversal of fortune. He goes from hero to villain, due to a tragic flaw. Yes, that's his ambition. And then the last part is the bit where sometimes I question whether this is really Macbeth. In addition, the realization of this flaw evokes sympathy from an audience. Now, do we feel sympathy for Macbeth at the end of the play? That's one of the great debates. I've had that debate with friends and colleagues and students over the last 20 years. It's hard to feel sympathy for him. What we do feel is that the way he ends the play was a terrible waste. and he was a potentially great man, a potentially a great warrior, a noble man, a man who loved his wife, a man who understood his duty, but who was undone by his own flaws. And that's where his tragedy lies. Okay? Now again, I'm going to keep this short. So what do we need to know about Macbeth? At the start, we need to know, in Act 1, we need to know why we might like him. He has to go on this journey in the play, and he has to have an arc. So if you like, he starts here, and then he falls, okay? And he starts as someone that we admire, because the more he has to lose, the more interesting it is as we watch him as an audience losing it. So at the beginning, there's no doubt he is a heroic and sympathetic figure. Why? He's a warrior. People admire his prowess on the battlefield. He saves Scotland from rebels and invaders. He personifies duty, understanding his place in the natural order and his obligation to serve as king. He absolutely loves his wife, and there's a beautiful intimacy in that relationship, which is sincere and refreshing. The witches do target him, so we sympathize with him because they identify his weakness, and they deliberately set out to use him as a tool for their own malicious purposes. And he does, in Act 1, display conscience. And that's the crucial thing, okay? Conscience is very important. The idea that he knows that what he's thinking about doing is bad or is wrong, and the fact that he doesn't act without first going through a crisis of conscience, and that makes him human. And we see that in the speeches that he delivers in much of Act 1. So again, what we're looking at here are key quotes. Now, am I suggesting you learn all these? No. Do I know them all? Yes, because I read the play a lot. Again, the more you know the play, the easier it is going to be to answer these questions. I'm going to break down 7 quotes here, and that's the end of the little video, okay? These are great quotes to know. First of all, in Act 1, Scene 2, the sergeant reports Macbeth's actions against MacDonald's rebel army. He's described as brave Macbeth. Okay, so there you have a simple thing. Language has come up on Macbeth a lot. That's a noun, that's an adjective. The addition of the adjective brave to Macbeth's name is indicative of his status as someone who is held in esteem in the society. He's brave Macbeth, deserving of that name. So his actions prove he's brave Macbeth. The sergeant describes Macbeth on the battlefield disdaining fortune. Now that means not caring about himself, being selfless, putting himself in danger in order to do his duty. I love Valor's minion. Again, a brilliant image. And don't forget, imagery is a big part of this play, and it has been asked many times on the Shakespeare questions. You know, how Shakespeare's language influences our view of characters and so on, or even how much we enjoy this play. And one of the things is the language. So Valor there is personified. Valor is an abstract noun. It means bravery. And Macbeth is described as the servant of bravery itself. So again, this is indicative of his status at the beginning, before we ever meet him, as a hero. When Duncan hears of Macbeth's bravery, he calls him valiant. So look what you have, right? You have brave, you have valor, and you have valiant. Sorry about the delay there. I'm, as you know, useless with technology. Okay, so all of these words are very deliberately chosen. Shakespeare uses these words in association with Macbeth because he wants, before we even meet Macbeth, don't forget we don't meet him until Act 1, Scene 3, but this is Act 1, Scene 2 when these words are spoken. Before we even meet Macbeth, we hear that he is a great guy, a guy who is greatly admired, a hero. Valiant cousin, worthy gentleman, and it's important that you note that he is the king's cousin. So he is a member of the extended royal family, okay? And that's important when you think about his ambition and his desire to be king, and his sense that maybe I should have been king in the first place. When the sergeant leaves because he's wounded and he's going to get medical aid, Ross then enters Duncan's presence and tells Duncan that after Macbeth defeated MacDonald, the rebel, there was another problem because a Norwegian or Viking army had landed in Scotland, led by a guy called Swenno. And Macbeth and Banquo turned, having fought so bravely to defeat the rebel army led by MacDonald, and took on the frightening Viking army and defeated them too. So again, this guy is serving his king, he's serving his country, he's putting himself in danger. He is a guy who understands his duty. And again, the language used to describe him is fantastic. Here we have what is called a classical allusion. Classical meaning a reference to ancient Greece and Rome. An allusion is a reference to, information that maybe isn't explained. The presumption is Shakespeare often put classical allusions in his play. I presume, we don't know, there's only speculation. Shakespeare didn't leave behind any, this is why I wrote this. But essentially, he was writing for an audience which was very broad. He was writing, much of his audience were illiterate and uneducated, but he also had members of his audience who were extremely educated. And education in Shakespeare's time revolved around study of the classics. So referencing Bellona is a classical allusion because members of his audience would have understood that reference. Bellona was a Roman goddess of war. So to describe Macbeth as Bellona's bridegroom is to describe Macbeth essentially as the husband of the goddess of war, or if you want to simplify it, as the god of war. So it is further evidence of his status as a great warrior and a great hero. But from the beginning, before we even meet him, Macbeth is covered in blood. Ross describes him lapped in proof. That means soaked in blood. Lapped in proof means soaked in blood. So there's this conflict in us as an audience from the outset, before we even meet Macbeth. From the beginning, when we meet the witches and we know that they're sinister and of the devil, and that's what sinister means, and they're going to meet Macbeth, we're suspicious. Then when we hear of this great victory that he won, within the victory, there is the description of him, the sword smoking with bloody execution. We'll look at that quote in a minute. Smoking with bloody execution, taking a lad's head off and sticking it on a pike, having unseamed him from his knave to his chops, and here he is, in the battlefield covered in blood. So there's something, we admire his military prowess because he's serving, for want of a better term, good. He's serving his king against rebels and invaders. But there's an edge to this guy before we even meet him. He is somebody who is, soaked in blood. Now, so that's all him being a hero. That all matches up with admired warrior, Scotland's favourite, personification of duty. I want to go down to number 6 here. And I want to look at this quote here. When Macbeth is told by the witches he's going to be king. Now, this is in Act 1, Scene 3, number 5 is. So the first 3 quotes are from Act 1, Scene 2. This is from Act 1, Scene 3. When Macbeth first meets the witches and they tell him, all hail Macbeth that shalt be king hereafter, he gives us a little soliloquy. And in that soliloquy, he asks himself about the meaning of what he calls the supernatural solicitings. Supernatural solicitings meaning the message given to him by the witches. He knows that they're supernatural. And we see from the very beginning, he understands that what the witches have said cannot mean, or it means that he has a dilemma. Because if he's going to be king, he knows there's only way he can be king. And there's only one way he can be king, and that's by killing the king. He knows that from the beginning. Don't forget, the witches don't make him commit regicide. They don't even put the idea of regicide in his head. They just tell him, you're going to be king. The idea of regicide comes from him. And I think this is one of the most important quotes in the play. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion? Whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs. I mean, talk about language. Just Shakespeare. Look, you know me. This guy is my favourite writer. I love books, but nobody comes anywhere close to Shakespeare. And it's the language for me. What is he saying? He's saying he has immediately thought of something terrible. That's suggestion. That's regicide. It's popping in, he's yielding to it. It's popping into his head. It's like that thing where you have a thought and you go, oh, Jesus, I don't want to have that thought. Where did that come from? But he knows when the witches say king and he's going, oh, king, because that's the thing he wants to be. But he knows that the only way he can be king is by committing regicide. And that's why the thought of regicide in Shakespeare's wonderful imagery is horrid, and it makes his hair fall out and makes his heart hammer in his chest. And why does it make his heart hammer in his chest? Well, for so many reasons, but if I can list maybe 3 of them. Number 1, if he commits regicide and he seizes the crown, it's going to make his hidden dream come true. So that's exciting. Number 2, it would mean breaking every rule and going against every principle that he has dedicated his life to. That's service, duty, understanding his place in the natural order, doing the right thing. Number 3, he knows that God is, you ready for these 3 words? Omnipotent, all-powerful, omnipresent, everywhere, and most importantly, God will punish him. He knows that God will ensure that somehow he will be punished, and if he doesn't get punished in this world, he will most certainly be punished in the next world. So that's why he's, this is horrific, because he knows if he does this thing, he can't get away with it. Okay, he knows that. And that word omni, O-M-N-I, means all. Omnipotent, omnipotent means all-powerful. Omnipresent means everywhere. And then, of course, there's omniscient, which means all-knowing. So he can hide things from man. He knows that. You can get away with crimes in the world of man. But God knows everything. And that's why the idea of regicide is so horrific to him, because he knows from the very, very start that if he kills the king, he won't just be destroying Duncan's life, he will be destroying his own life. He knows that. And he's caught in this conscience, this dilemma. And we have to wonder, will the power of his... we've all had thoughts of things we'd like to do, and then we've got, Jesus, I can't do that. That's wrong. The difference with Macbeth is that the witches have identified his ambition is so powerful. He himself calls it vaulting ambition, that it might negate all those other considerations. So that's why Hecate was so right about what she said about him. So there you go. Conscience. I said he's in love with his wife. Look at the way he addresses his letter. My dearest partner in greatness. We have to admire that. There's an intimacy and a real love that he has for his wife, and she returns to him. That enamors is the wrong word. Enamors is okay. Enamors him to the audience. Makes the audience like him at the beginning. He's a hero. He's been tempted by the witches. He's been drawn into this, idea of regicide, or actually not drawn. It comes from him, but the witches do target him. He is plagued by conscience. He's not a psycho. He doesn't just go, right, I'm going to kill the king. He knows what's right and he knows what's wrong, and he loves his wife. These are all of the reasons why at the beginning he's a sympathetic character. Finally then, the idea that the witches target him, and the reason they target him is because of this. And this is from his soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 7 of the play. And it's one of the greatest soliloquies ever written by Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, he was a genius. And in that soliloquy, Macbeth says, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition. And the imagery again is really clever. It's equestrian imagery this time, to do with horses. A spur is it's like an instrument used by an equestrian, a jockey, somebody on a horse. You have it on your boots. You kick the side of the flank of the horse, and it makes the horse go. So in this sense, it's a motivation. He says, I have no motivation. In that speech, which I will go through with you, the soliloquies later on in the year, he gives 7 reasons why he shouldn't kill the king. He says, he's my cousin. He says, he's my guest in my house. He says, if I do it, God will know. He knows he'd be damned if he does it. He comes up with 7 reasons not to do it, and only 1 reason to do it. And that reason is his vaulting ambition. And we know that the witches have spotted that weakness in him. And we know that we sense that weakness is going to be so powerful that it might draw him in to this terrible act that will destroy him. And even that scenario, a man struggling against forces both external and internal, that scenario makes him sympathetic at the beginning. But what he does later in the play erodes that sympathy. But that's for the next day. So if you're in my grind classes, we're going to start here with this box next week. And I hope you found that useful. If you're not in my grind classes, I'll be recording one of these videos going around this mind map over the course of the next few weeks. And then I'll be going on to the one on Lady Macbeth. You can see it there. And so on. And as I said in class before, if you find those useful, do me a favor, give them a thumbs up, because otherwise, if I don't think people are finding them useful, I won't be sitting down when I should be playing with my children making these videos. Thank you very much.